Sony wins for some obvious reasons, but I thought it'd be fun to go through the history of the Sony cameras, their hybrid cameras, specifically the ones designed with video in mind, because that's how I like to shoot. I like to have photography and video all in the palm of my hand, ready to go. Throw it in a backpack. It's ready at a moment's notice. Just put a lens on, throw a battery in, SD card, you're good to go. Why does Sony keep winning in this area where other companies seem to flounder and fail time and time again? Well, let's start at the beginning. This isn't the true beginning of all Sony mirrorless, but it's at least the beginning for me where I started to pay attention to Sony and what they had to offer in terms of a hybrid that did excellent quality video, and that's the a7s. I didn't buy it at the time, but I rented it and I shot with it a few times and I loved it. The a7s being known for its incredible low light capabilities. This is what put this camera on the map and what made a lot of people go, wow, I can shoot in pitch black and I can actually see what's there, and it's not awful, just minimal lighting, and I can have really clean images. Granted, it was only 1080p, which this was announced April of 2014. 2 months earlier, Panasonic had just announced the GH4 being their 4K camera. So the a7s was always up against the GH4, and at the time, the battle was resolution versus sensor size and the low light capabilities that come with that on the a7s. But the a7s was 1080p, and that's what it did. It did good low light 1080p with a full frame mirrorless camera when Canon wasn't really doing that in 2014. So the a7S III had that ding against it in that it wasn't 4K, but in 2014 you're also talking about a time where there were a lot of people who didn't even believe in 4K. It sounds kind of silly, but this has been a thing even since Red introduced the concept when the Red 1 was coming out, of 4K being a need or a necessity, and people saying 1080p is fine, 1080p is fine, it's enough, it's enough. Like that Airy Alexa cameras notoriously like, oh, you only need 1080p, that's all you need. The human eye can't even see 4K, which is not true. You can see 4K. It just depends on the distance you are away from the screen. But in any case, the a7s had those people who hated it for the fact that it wasn't doing what Panasonic was doing with 4K, but it captured this part of the market that was looking for high quality video in a full frame video in a mirrorless camera. And the fact that they specifically designed the sensor with larger photo sites because they had less resolution to kind of see in the dark was a really, I don't want to say game changer, but I'll use that word. It was fairly impressive, incredibly impressive at the time, how good the a7s was in low light compared to everything else. But not my personal choice, because I opted for the GH4 in favor of 4K and some of those more video-centric features. But the a7s, it just had too many things that were against it in terms of video, but I think overall it captured the imagination and the attention of a lot of people and got people excited about Sony and these cameras buying into the system for the a7s in 2014. Then you move on to the a7s Mark II, announced September 2015. Now, this camera offered the 4K. And so anyone who criticized the a7s for only being 1080, now you've got 4K. But the ding again was that it didn't do high frame rate 4K. It just did 4K, 24 and 30. But again, incredibly good in low light, same full frame sensor. Now people are familiar with the Sony system. They have the Sony Glass. Obvious upgrade to go from 1080 to 4K. And I should say that I think, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I'm pretty sure the a7s did allow you to do 4K, but it had to be to an external monitor, external recorder, which also too were a lot less common in 2014, more expensive. Today, you can get a Ninja 5 and they're, I think, like 600 or 700 bucks, and they can do everything you would want. Back in 2014, not quite the same. The a7s Mark II, now you could do 4K in body, but not the greatest codec. It's still 8-bit 420. Color grading is a little bit difficult with these clips. There were some minor inconveniences with the a7s II, but those baseline fundamental foundational principles of like what the camera is. It's a full frame 4K mirrorless camera that can see in the dark. That alone on paper, I think, sells it. And people are willing to work with the small batteries and the goofy workarounds for some of the file structure and recording time limits. If you're a video person and you need to record continuous, then like it is kind of a non-starter to look at something of like, oh, I can only record 30-minute clips. But in general, baseline principles, the A7S Mark II, obvious choice for a lot of people. And you saw a lot of people embrace the system even more and fall even more in love with Sony. Hey, listening, upgrading to 4K, giving us these features, even though Sony has a high-end broadcast, camera line for video. They designed a hybrid, the A7S, for video as well. And I think people really appreciate that, and the fact that it's not unnecessarily limited in the same way that Canon kind of does with some of the crop modes and stuff that they've done on their full frame cameras. And now where are we? We're at the A7S Mark III. Finally, 2020 announced in July, the A7S Mark III. And what does it do? It fixes all of the problems that people have constantly criticized Sony about. The batteries being too small and they don't last long enough. The flip screen not being convenient. Now it's got the right flip screen. Now it does 4K and it goes all the way up to 120 frames per second. They've implemented 10-bit. They've offered up all the things that people have criticized. The IBIS, internal stabilization. You've got the same great low light, a sensor designed for 4K video specifically, exceptional autofocus tracking capabilities. It basically is everything you would want in the camera to be. Every criticized thrown at Sony for the other A7S cameras basically falls away. There may be some minor annoyances and inconveniences with the A7S III, but in general, it does pretty much everything you would want. There's plenty of people who have done reviews and have talked about it, but I want to take this into the conversation of in the context of Panasonic and Canon and Nikon, like why has Sony done such a great job capturing people's dollars? Like they're in the business of making money. How are they getting people to buy their cameras? They're giving people what they want, and they're doing it. If you look at the A7S series, we talked about 3 cameras: the A7S, the A7S II, and the A7S III. They're making intentional, meaningful updates to address the main complaints and main criticisms and spending their time. The A7S III being announced July 2020, and there being basically almost a 5-year gap between the A7S II and the A7S III. That's a long time, but it gave them time to design a well-crafted, intentional camera that isn't plagued with a bunch of problems or limitations. They've really done the best they can to basically address every issue as far as I can see it. That's why I think they keep winning, because they give people what they want. They listen to the customer, and they know that what Panasonic is doing in some ways is better than what they're offering, and that what Canon is doing is better than what they're offering. And so how can they change their camera to maintain what it is, the S series specifically being kind of the video version. Of course, there's the A7 that's kind of the does it all, sort of, more or less, and then the A7R with higher resolution for if you're really into photography and you need that feature. But the A7S being the lower res, lower megapixel, 4K only, which I don't think they had to go 6K. I don't think they had to go 8K. I think at this time and place, a lot of people are just excited to have the 4K 120 with the A7S III. And that's why I think, again, Sony is winning, is just they're delivering what people want and what they expect, listening to the feedback, taking the criticism, and making adjustments, making changes quickly, but also spending the time to do it intentionally. It isn't just throwing a feature in there to throw the feature in there and then the camera overheats or it doesn't work quite right or it's kind of buggy. It's no, they put the feature in there and it works as advertised. And I think you're going to have a lot of people buying the A7S III, and you're going to have a lot more people, not only the people who have the A7S, the A7S II, and now going to the A7S III, those people, it's an obvious upgrade. Yes, get the camera. A7S III, though, is enough to get a lot of new customers, people switching systems, I think. People who may have been shooting Canon and they've been holding on, waiting, for the R5 or the R6, and they're going, oh, I'm going to go Sony. People who've been Panasonic a long time, maybe going to go Sony. We'll see how that all plays out once these are finally out there and you kind of get a feel for what people are using in the field. But it's not rocket science of why Sony's winning. They're just doing the right thing. They're making good choices. They're making good products, and then they're rewarded for it because people want to buy it.